Lea and Garble, A True Love by Swedish Devil. Ever since Lea was moved to Ponyville with her family, she had often felt lonely. Even she has many great friends, and since even she was bullied when she was younger, most of her friends had their special song pony, but she wanted her own also. So she told her parents that one day that she was going to travel around in Equestria just to see what else is out there. And at first, her mother, Galaxy Star, she was actually approval for this, but T-Rex, her father, he was not so much approval at first. But after she told him that she wanted to see more about Equestria and read it, she wanted to experience the entire nature for herself, rather than reading about it in a book. Since that is not the same experience, to experience it by herself, not to reading it about it. It's not the same thing. She tried to convince her father over and over until he convinced, but only that she promised to write back as often every week, just to notice that she is okay. And she promised to do that. So one day she said goodbye to her sister, Ray Sparks, and her friends, and promised to be back soon. She started to travel around. First she traveled to Maidhaddon, Trottingham, and then so and beyond. To Crystal Empire, she stayed for a couple of weeks, became good friends with Cadence, Shining Armor, and Flurry Heart. Then she traveled all the way to Corfestone, where she met Gilda, Gabby, which she became very good friends with. She even traveled to Arabia, and where she spent at least almost a month. She learned so much about this. Then, just before she was going back home, there was one other place she wanted to go to, and that was Dragonlance. She traveled there since Amber was a good friend of her. She wanted to meet new dragons and also to meet Amber. She hadn't seen her in months, almost a year. And when she arrived, Amber was quite busy, so she had to walking around in anywhere she could find. Then she saw Garble, a dread dragon that often bullies others, especially Spike. But over the last few years, Garble had enough mature and became more friendly to others. Even he sometimes tried to seem tough, brave, but he has been more friendly, but still tough. She thought that he was very brave when he jumped in the lava river, swimming around, which since the lava would not touch him, that he could grab rocks, lift them high up in the air. He was very much strong in this, like almost anything. She actually started to blush when she saw him, and she stayed in Dragon's Lands for a couple of days with Amber. They spent much time together talking. What else she did do when she returned home? Her parents was happy to see her, but they couldn't notice that something was odd with their daughter. She was not the same as when she left almost a year ago. She started to act a little bit different. She started to talk to mostly for herself, or daydreaming when she was working at her work, or she often talked to friends more about romance and boys and most of those things. She usually don't talk about much of boys and romance before, so they wonder what could it bring up to ask those questions and talk about it. So they confronted their daughter, and she explained why she talked about this. She had fallen in love with a dragon. Galaxy Star, she was actually happy to hear about this. She even asked if Dragon knows about it, but he said no. She hasn't told him, even talked to him either. But when Tarek found out it was a dragon, he wasn't furious, mad, or anything. He just was shocked. He was just happy to see that she was happy and that she was in love, but just stunned, or more than shocked just to hear about it. But he swore that he will not be mad if he met the dragon itself. But when they asked which dragon it was, then they found out it was Garble. Galaxy Star didn't know much about him except from stories that she heard from Twilight and Spike. But Tyrant, otherwise, he knew a little more about Garble since he had met him in person a few times before. Since the dragons are furious warrior type creatures, but most of the time they have been more friendly ones as well. And Lea could stop thinking about Garble so much over the last few months that afterwards that she met him. She even write to Amber sometimes, so just asking how is everything in the Dragon's Lands and how to be a Dragon Lord, and if it was possible for a dragon to be married with an alicorn or a pony, and Amber was asking herself why she asked about this, but she was just replying it was just some study she was making and she was curious about it, and Amber said that it wasn't not any laws or rules for a dragon to marry another species. So that made her happy to see it. So one day she traveled back to Dragon's Lands just to see Amber, just to talk to her, and maybe try to spend some time with Garble. But when she saw Garble, he was talking to some of his friends, so she wanted to interrupt. But he saw her and named her name, and she looked up to him and she started to blush. He walked up to her and asked what she is doing there. He knows that she's a friend of Amber and that she's a friend of Spike, but he asked why. I mean, for a reason. Then she explained why he was there. She was there for talking to Amber for some bit, and she wanted to talk to him. That she wants to tell her something. And he looked at her with a curious look, and she said right out that she loves him, and before he could say anything, she teleported right away, all the way back home. She couldn't stop thinking about Garble after she said to him. And most of this, she didn't know that Garble had started to like her as well. Since he couldn't stop thinking about her. And Lea, she didn't leave much of Equestria, or she didn't leave her home since for the next several days. She didn't say much to her friends. She tried to avoid the topic of love or romance. Suddenly, she was talking about it and next, nothing. So they wondered what's happened. She said, "Oh, nothing. It was just some other questions I asked and something." They thought that she was in love with someone, but turns out she was actually did. But she never told any other ones except her parents. And what happened next? One day, Garble actually showed up in Poland. When Lea heard about this, she was panicked. She wondered what he was doing there and what's going on. What was going to happen if he found her there. So she tried to explain to her parents that she was going somewhere, but they tried to stop her, tell her that she had to speak to Garble. She couldn't avoid him at any time. She had to tell him, or at least listen what he had to say before she could run away, because if she do it, he will try to find her not at a time, even not to know what he was going to say will haunt her to ever to find out curiously. So Lea decided to enter the park to see Garble. Garble was there to talk to her. He explained about what he was doing there and why, and she was more surprised about this. And just afterwards, a few days after, they were actually dating. Tirak, Galaxy Star, was more happy to see their daughter was happy. And even that Red Sparks and Discord was happy to see that Lea was also happy. Because they had noticed that Lea was unhappy before even she met Garble. For most of the time when they dating, they were often in Dragon's Lands, trying some dragon games, or in Ponyville for eating some lunch together, or in some picnics or some sort of things. But most of the time, they just spend much time together as possible. Even most of the time they were together, Twilight was worried about Lea. She thought this was some sort of type of fling that they weren't going to work. But Spike assured her that the true love between Lea and Garble was true. So she accepted it. And she wanted to know more about dragons' feelings for other species, since Spike was the only one she knew who loves a pony, but now there's two others as well. And Spike, he was more interested in Garble, how he felt for Lea. So he often asked her and him about this. Talked about what he felt for Lea and if he possibly wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, like marriage, children. And Garble tried to avoid those topics and questions at first. But afterwards, he said that he wanted to marry her, but he didn't know exactly when or how he would do it. But Spike told him how to do it. For example, a few ideas. Then Spike told him that he should do it soon when he felt ready. Because Spike has been married with Rarity for at least a number of years now, and they had two daughters of their own. So Spike gave him a thumb up and just said, cross fingers, and he hoped for everything to work out. Garble was more nervous now and as ever before. He bought a ring in Crystal Empire once he was able to visit. Then, when he came back to Ponyville a few months later, he was so nervous to ask Lea about this big question. So he took her to the park to have this casual talk with her, just to talk, to break the ice the moment, just to not to sound awkward at first. And then he went down on knee and showed her the ring and asked her to marry her. And she was so happy she couldn't say much except yes over and over and over. And Garble wasn't that much nervous anymore. When they told about her parents about this, her mother and her sister was more happier than everyone could be. And her father, well, he wasn't that much angry, he was very proud of Garble and said, welcome to the family, Garble. And Tirak was now happy to have a second son-in-law, and also a brave one. And the wedding. Well, they had not decided if it was going to be in Dragon's Lands, or in Ponyville, or Canterlot, but after some talk, they decided in Ponyville. But they decided to invite some members of the dragons from Crystal Empire. Well, some dragons have moved to Crystal Empire a few months after they first became a treaty between dragons and the ponies to live among them. Well, except from Philadelphia with the Dragon Town. But most of the cities are out there. But Garble was more happy to be married with Lea. Even he said to himself, oh, this is not going to work. But he wanted to stay with her, since she is his love of her life. And the wedding, it was taken a few months later, and it was a big one. It was probably the biggest wedding in the year in Poland, and probably one of the biggest weddings of the year in entire Equestria. And after this wedding, it was a big party. The party lasted for almost an entire day and almost half of the evening. And Garble and Lea, they celebrated their honeymoon not in one place. They actually celebrated first in Crystal Empire, then traveled to Saudi Arabia and back. And then they were back home. They decided both to live in Ponyville as well. But for the next few months after the wedding, Garble left Lea to return back home, but he was just there for helping to build the first Dragon City. Well, when Lea was back home, she found out she was pregnant with twin daughters. But she didn't tell Garble about this until he came back, the next 3 months later. By that time, she was 5 months pregnant. And when he found out that he was going to be a father, he took it very differently than Terek did when he found out. Garble was actually not excited to be a father so soon, so he actually left Lea, returned back to home, his homeland. And Lea took this very hard, and she found out from that she would probably won't be alone then. When she told her parents about this, Terek was so furious that he actually left and went all the way to Dragon's Lands to find Terek and Garble and try to talk sense to him. But Garble said why, explained why he did it. He wanted to get away from this, just to try to handle the news. He wanted some time alone to process all the news that he's going to be a father. He said that he wanted to be there for Lea, but just he wanted to be away from time to just to think, to process all this, because that was just something big news for him. And Terek realized that he was telling the truth, because not all parents or new parents can handle this. Some new fathers often handle it quite well, but others, they freak out about this and try to leave the wife just to think about it, try to process, even take days or months, or sometimes they can take days or weeks up to a couple of months to process all this. But Terek realized that he had to bring back Garble because Lea was devastated about this. She thought she's going to raise the twins alone. And Garble realized what he was doing was wrong. So he decided to come back with Terek. And while back home, he apologized to Lea, said why he did this. And of course, she forgave him. And a few months later, their twin daughters were born. And much to surprise, their daughters were half dragon and half alicorn, but also very much strong in magic. Their mother trained them to control the magic, while their father could help them to control the fire-breathing ability which they inherited from him. Also, try how to fly with dragon wings instead for alicorn wings. But most of the stories from what Garble told stories a lot of for their daughters of how they met and about dragons and alicorns, how everything was long time ago. But most of the stories that their daughters listened carefully to. And that's how Lea and Garble found their true love and got a big family. The